Incorporating Social Enterprise. I'm Carolyn Mullen. I'm Vice President and CFO here at IS, and I have the pleasure of getting to introduce our webinar today and our participants. For some time now, IS has been considering whether changes should be made to our business model. Over the course of our work on this, we've had numerous conversations with IS member organizations that have implemented changes to their models to understand the nature of implementing such changes. As we contemplated what we learned, we realized there could be tremendous value in sharing these learnings with IS members that might also be contemplating changes in their own models. As a result, we're launching this series of webinars featuring organizations that have instituted changes in their models and how they operate. This webinar is the first in that series. The National Council on Aging, over the course of the last several years, set about incorporating social enterprise into every aspect of its work. In this presentation, CEOs Jim Furman and Jay Greenberg will share what prompted the decision to build social enterprise into their business model, how they plan to make the changes, what went into the change, and any good practices and lessons they learned so far in their journey. Jay Greenberg is CEO of NCOA Services, LLC. Using a social enterprise model, NCOA Services partners with for-profit and nonprofit organizations to create and diffuse sustainable, scalable solutions to key issues facing an aging society. Dr. Greenberg is also responsible for setting the strategic direction for NCOA's suite of consumer-facing web solutions and fostering social enterprise thinking throughout NCOA. For more than 30 years, James Furman has been a leading force for innovation in services, programs, and public policies for older persons. Under his leadership, NCOA has developed many nationally acclaimed programs to improve the health, independence, and economic security of older adults. NCOA has also developed core competencies in collaborative leadership, fostering and scaling evidence-based innovations and advocacy. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can add comments to the chat box as well. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to Jim and Jay.
Hello, I'm Jim Furman. I'm delighted to be here today with my colleague, Jay Greenberg. We are not experts in social enterprise, but we're practitioners in social enterprise. We've been working at it for about 8 years now in a very serious way. And it's our hope that you, those of you that are listening in on this, will get something useful out of this. In my time at the independent sector, I've always found it valuable to learn from other colleagues what they've succeeded at, perhaps even more where they've failed, and what are some of the lessons learned that can help others. So it's in that spirit that Jay and I are here today. I'd also like to thank my colleague who's off screen, Larissa Marco, who's the Director of Social Enterprise Strategy, who's actually helped us pull this together into a hopefully somewhat coherent presentation. So with that, next slide, please. Are we going to ask some questions first, or when are the questions coming in? We did want to get a pulse of the audience before we went much further by asking you to raise your hands, if you can, for 2 questions, really to understand a little bit more of where all of you are coming from. This is the first time, so we'll hope you will, or should we skip do we have the questions, or we can do without them? Okay, we were going to ask you questions, so you can ask yourselves this question, whether, to what extent you have been thinking about changing business models. My guess is we have an audience of a few around the table. My guess is most of us are thinking about changing our business models, both because the current models may not be working so well, but even if our current models are working well, all of us are interested in doing more, and that means developing new revenue streams. So it's in that context that we put together this presentation. We will begin first by how we define social enterprise and what we think about it, then share with you some of our experiences with social enterprise, but then hopefully allow the bulk of the time for lessons learned and recommendations and questions and answers. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn to Jay Greenberg, who I think is an extraordinary person in that he has had deep experience both in business development and nonprofit. And I can say clearly that we would not be where we are today without Jay's persistence and leadership.
Thanks, Jim. Let's start where good place to start, which is with definitions. And like with most definitions, the wonderful thing about them is you make up the one that works for you. When we started this work, the one that really jumped out at us was the one that root cause defined, and you can see that on your screen. It particularly resonated to me because I'm a recovering economist, and economists are probably the only people in the world that use the term market failure. But I think the key things there are that it can be transformational, it's financially sustainable, and that it is solving a social problem. And those are the key components of a social enterprise. And as we go on into the conversation, we'll dig more into that, and then how we are operationalizing that, or the pieces that we think that are really critical to making that happen. I do want to give you an example, though, from the aging space. From my perspective, a great example of a market failure and a transformational solution. For many of you, you either weren't alive or you were quite young, but prior to 1965, seniors in this country didn't have health insurance. Medicare wasn't born yet, and most employers did not have post-retirement health benefits of any sort, and that was particularly true of teachers. And so small group of teachers actually got together with an insurance company and said, we're going to do something about that. And wisely, those teachers made sure that they controlled a lot of important things that ultimately determined the value proposition to seniors and solving that social problem. And that organization has gone through several names. Today's name is AARP. And from my perspective, the reason why all of us could have different points of view about AARP today, but it's important, I think, to point out that the reason they are, I would submit, the reason they are as large as they are today is because they solved an incredibly important market failure, which was health insurance for seniors. So now let's move on to sort of the importance of social enterprise, and I would add also the opportunity for social enterprise today more than ever. And so basically, most of us realize that very few dollars in GDP come to charities, and the majority of dollars in GDP are in the private sector. And so the voluntary sector, the not-for-profit sector, has a challenge, and that's basically this. Even if we have a really good service, we have difficulty getting the capital to scale that so that we can have massive or transformational social impact. And that's a real challenge, there's no doubt about it. There's a twin sort of environmental factor these days, which is most of the sectors of the private sector are not trusted, and sometimes for very good reason. And so there is this opportunity to come together with the private sector if we can do it in a way that helps the voluntary sector achieve what it's trying to do, and also help the private sector firm to do what it wants to do. Or as one of my board members likes to say, yeah, what we do is figure out how to get the private sector to do our bidding. And if your board can be saying that, then you know you in fact are involved in a social enterprise rather than just a profit-making enterprise. So let's dig a little deeper into kind of our definition. I apologize. I'm a recovering university professor, and so I like to dissect things. We took the definition I showed you before and really put it into two very succinct pieces. The first piece is sort of our internal definition, which talks about things being market-driven, self-sustaining solutions to social impact. Really just a reformulation of the root cause definition without the economic jargon in it. The second piece, though, is something that as a practitioner, I can tell you is critical, and that is if it's really going to be a true social enterprise as opposed to simply a money-making proposition, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with a money-making proposition, but if it's going to be a social enterprise, it's really important that each of the stakeholders that has the fiduciary responsibility to its stakeholders, and in particular, that the partner that has a fiduciary responsibility for the social impact, in this case, the voluntary organization, if there's going to be a partnership with the private sector, that organization has to have fiduciary responsibility for ensuring that the social mission is in fact achieved. And that means if you have fiduciary responsibility, you also have to have control over key decision making. And we'll talk more about that as we move on, and we'll talk about why, given this duality, the advent of a new corporate form, the benefits corporation, which I know many of you know something about, becomes potentially a very efficient way of thinking about and doing social enterprises.
Thank you. So one of the things that I may join as the CEO of NSEL, I'm a concepts guy, a big vision guy, and then it helps me to have cookbooks and pathways and diagrams to help me figure out what really needs to happen. Even if I can't do it, at least understand what has to happen and how to engage the right people. So I found that this to be helpful to us and hopefully helpful to others as well. A large part of this document is taken from a traditional business school or business development framework that the 5 stages of growing a business are imagining the commercial need and opportunity, defining the commercial approach, beginning to demonstrate viability, and then going to scale, both scaling up and generating the capital to achieve this. What makes the social enterprise different is the additional layer of solving for a social need and opportunity, which begins with there's a problem, and then we have a solution or an intervention, and then typically we have to prove the intervention works. And then in the most typical case, this is a mistake we've made many times and others have, is that they do those first 3 things and then they look around and say, now how are we going to commercialize this? And if there's one thing that I can say, a lot of, frankly, doing things like this is cathartic, because things which cost us a lot of agony and pain, maybe you can learn from and avoid from this, is my first takeaway is that this is a social enterprise, it's a simultaneous equation you're solving for. And if you first only begin about thinking about need and opportunity, improving an intervention, doing the research to prove it works, and then trying to figure out what the commercial need and approach and viability is, you're going to likely take at least 3 times as long, and you're going to take a lot more time and money to get to where you need to. So in an ideal sense, as you're thinking about this, something I give Jay credit for, he's much better than I am, is realize from the beginning it's a simultaneous equation, and even though a lot of the new social need and opportunity is familiar to us from our charitable work, the sooner you have a leg up on understanding the commercial need and opportunity is really critical. That's kind of lesson number 1. The second one, for at least for us, is I put that red line in there, and I could have made that the Grand Canyon as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the gap of financing and strategies. That most of us are used to getting grants and philanthropic support to attack a social problem, to define an innovative solution, and maybe even to evaluate that solution. And sometimes it's even possible to get some money to do some business planning. But then in our experience, and we'll delve more into that, it's rare, not impossible, but rare that the same sources of financing are going to work for you to solve for market entry, growth, and sustainability. And so that is a recognition of the great challenge that is there as well. Next slide, please. We're about to jump into the briefly the NCLA experiences, but I did want to let you know that if you're interested in this, there are 3 books that I would highly recommend, and they're all kind of linked. The first book is Jim Collins' Good to Great in the Social Sectors, which I'm guessing many of you have read. It's 30 pages, and what I really liked about that book is it bridges business thinking and social thinking to allow people to have a common language. Built to Last, which was actually written earlier, is more of a cookbook about how to build a great corporation, and I think I found, again, I'm a cookbook guy, I liked it a lot. And then Great from the Start is written about how to do startups, how to do startup businesses, but he steeped himself in the language and the philosophy of Jim Collins' work. So it's really a very nice a trilogy, if you will, by somewhat different authors. And part of this is because I'm going to be using some of that language as we talk, and so rather than explaining it at all times, I will be go back and read some of these if you don't understand what they mean. So let me begin with a quick overview of NCLA, how and why we got into this business. We are a 65-year-old charity formed in 66 now, in 1950. With a mission of improving the lives of older adults, especially those who are struggling, which that really means, people who are having a hard time. For most of our history, we had been involved in developing programs and scaling them, but our primary scaling strategy for us and for many organizations was to do a pilot project, prove that it worked, and then get the government to pay for it. So, for example, we did in the 60s, we did the first evaluations and pilots of the Meals on Wheels program, made the case to Congress, and that became something that's funded all over the country. We did the first pilot for a program called Foster Grandparents, proved that it worked, made the case, and scaled that. And so that I've also been very involved in advocating for Medicare reform and other kinds of things to encourage expansion of programs that will work. But what also happened in 2011 was, because we had drank the Kool-Aid of Jim Collins, and one of the Jim Collins talked about is that great organizations have BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious Goals. We adopted our BHAG to improve the health and economic security of 10 million people by 2020 as our external goal, and as a second internal goal to become a great enduring organization, which had metrics in terms of world-class core competencies, substantial financial reserves, great strength, etc. So those have been the guiding lights for us in the strategic context in which we've been doing all of our work since 2011. As part of the hedgehog, Collins is the concept that great organizations have piercing clarity about the answers to 3 questions. What are you passionate about? What are you best in the world at doing? And what metric will you use to drive performance in your organization? So we knew we were passionate about improving the lives of older adults, especially those who are struggling. Up until about 2008 or 9, our core strategies were 3: collaborative leadership, work bringing together people from different sectors, the business, government, nonprofits to solve social problems, innovative services, developing and scaling and proving the work community-based programs and since 2001 online programs, and being an advocate, particularly for disadvantaged older people, and bringing in the experience of our 2,000 community partners. But we also realized at the same time that the metric we were going to focus on was maximizing social impact. We believe that if we were constantly asking ourselves, how can we do more? How can we get to our goal of 10 million? How can we, and we do, report publicly each year on where we are, that if we kept asking ourselves and got better than that, doing better at that, that would spin the flywheel for us. However, as it became clear we were into this, that we didn't believe that we could get there to either our social impact goal or our great enduring organization goal through just collaborative leadership, innovative services, and advocacy. And for some of the reasons that Jay already gave, we as a board and the staff embraced the fact that we needed to become great at social enterprise, market-driven solutions in order to achieve our goals. So the important part of this was that all of this fit very much into an overall strategy of both social impact and organizational building. And for us, this led us to enter into the brave new world of social enterprise. Next slide. So what we'd like to do here now is describe with you 3 of the experiences that we are in the middle of now related to social enterprises. We'd like to tell you about them in this context that we've talked about. And as I said, share with you successes and failures and most important lessons learned, because I think you learn something from successes, but you learn more from struggles. And that's our goal. So Jay will begin.
I should know a lot if struggling gives you wisdom. So let's start with the context. And in each of these, we have that we're going to share. We have the same structure. But I also think that the context is important because the context really speaks to some of the things that Jim's already talked about and some of the things that he'll talk to later on in the conversation. In the context of our relationship with Canary Health, actually started before we began to create what we ultimately called the Healthy Aging Social Enterprise. And it started about 15 years ago. NCOA was doing its core work using its core competencies pre-social enterprise, and in particular, it was a thought leader in the field of evidence-based self-management for chronic conditions, and was working with Stanford and other originators of evidence-based self-management programs to get them promoted, to get funding for them, both as programs and to get R&D dollars for them. And those all started out as community-based, face-to-face programs. And they all generated out of Kate Lorick's lab at Stanford Medical School. And then that was about 15 years ago. About 7 years ago, Kate and her team ported their chronic disease self-management program to the internet. And as with all of their programs, it randomized clinical trial and actually showed that the online program had similar results to the community-based program, which actually shocked a lot of people. That was back in the day when before social media, when people were saying, really, people are going to really relate to each other the way they related to each other face to face? Very skeptical. In any event, Kate came to us for 2 reasons in asking her to help scale her online programs. One was we had this rich history with her, and she knew how passionate we were about it, and she understood that we understood the importance that the program that came out, in fact, was still based on the evidence, and we'll talk more about that and the importance of that. And the second thing is we have an online program called Benefits Checkup, which if you haven't been there, go to benefitscheckup.org. And basically, it's a program that helps people identify the benefits that they may be eligible for, and also gives them some instrumental assistance, and in some cases actually gets them to community-based organizations that we work with to actually get them enrolled in the programs, our benefits enrollment centers. And so we took on this challenge, and we took on the challenge with using a grant a larger grant that we had, and we had an amount of money to do business planning. And it's interesting because some of my background was in startup businesses, and when I saw the amount of money that we had to do business planning, I realized that I started 3 companies and got them moving on less money than that. And so we made a decision. That we would use part of the money to do business planning, and part of the money, because we knew we weren't going to get startup capital other than the amount of capital that N2A could invest. Although we did try to do some business plan competitions and things, but we also didn't want to stop while that was going on. And we decided that what we would do, and this gets into the approach, is we would leverage the business planning money, and we would in this first phase, we would do the business ourselves, sort of like a skunk works, what would be referred to in startup lingo. And then we would learn the business. We would see if there really are people out there or organizations out there that are going to really buy this stuff. And equally importantly, we would understand the importance of taking a program and transforming it into a product. Because there's a lot of difference between doing this on a small scale in a controlled environment versus when you're going to have hundreds and thousands, if not millions of people doing it. One little example is these are peer-led programs. So it's one thing to identify 100 peer leaders. It's another thing to identify, recruit, train, and quality control thousands of peer leaders. So there's things like that, sort of learning the business, if you will. But we also knew that we weren't the right organization for a lot of reasons to sort of take this big time. We knew at some point we needed to partner with an organization that had access to capital, that had the same values, that was willing to and agree to the quality of standards that we and Stanford set, be willing to be audited to them, and most importantly, realize that if they didn't do that and if they didn't remedy that we had the right to pull their license away. And so going back to keeping the fiduciary responsibility for the social impact, we had that, and they had all the business stuff. It took us about a year to find the right partner, literally. But we found that right partner. And the folks at Canary Health, they formed their company for the right reason. They're being successful, and we look for great things in that. I think the key lessons learned, the first one, anybody that's tried to get a program, regardless whether in the private sector or in the voluntary sector, these things take much longer than you ever imagined that they would, and just sort of be prepared for that. The other is, and it's something that's really critically important, is you really can use R&D grants to not only meet the requirements of the grant, but to then use that as an asset to go forward in doing other things. And if you think of businesses and business competencies as a series of Lego blocks, it gives you a Lego block that can be used. And it also points to the importance, I think, of making sure that while you have this new business model, and I don't think it's about changing business models, I think it's about adding business models, that when you have this new business model, make sure there's great cross-roughing and communications with your standard business models, because it's those traditional grant-driven businesses that are going to be, in essence, your seed capital if things are done in a strategic way. The other thing that I think is really important, and unfortunately in this one we sort of knew that going in, and that is there's a real difference between a product and a business. And so in this case, we were going to be selling to large corporations and to health plans, and they don't like buying one product at a time. They just have too many things on their agenda. And so really think about, is this a product or is this a business? And if you answer that question at the beginning, it'll really help you save a lot of time, a lot of money, and get your search for the right partner, which isn't easy, in a much more timely way.
So thank you. So another example, and by the way, I hope you folks on the line are writing down questions or thinking about things. We decided to go through the whole thing and then open it up to questions, because otherwise we were guessing you would ask a bunch of questions that we were going to answer later, but keep them coming. So another example of a program that is about 2.5 years into it is a program called the Aging Mastery Program. And our vision here is that most older adults are unprepared for the rest of their lives, that they have 20 years on average post-retirement, and they've just never been educated and given the tools and the support to optimize that frame of life, their health, their finances, what they do with their time, etc. And we have this vision that we could create great programs, educational programs and behavior change programs that would actually get people to make changes in their daily existence that would add up to improvements in health, well-being, and quality of life. The challenge we had, a couple. One is I'm a concept guy, so it's easy to have a great idea and a great concept, but that we weren't unable to find some funder who was going to write us a multi-million-dollar check to do this. But as we tend to do, we believe in our work and we get going. But what we've been doing is piecing together funding from many places. And in the aging space in particular, I would say 85–90% of all the philanthropy is place-based. It's community foundations, healthcare conversion foundation, groups that want to fund in Iowa or want to fund in Northern California. And that created a great challenge because, yes, we want to implement the program, but we also needed to build the core elements of this program. The second thing was we were aware that at least we decided to start with a community-based program, but we know that community-based programs are labor-intensive and sometimes difficult to scale for some of the kinds of reasons that Jay just talked about, and we learned with the earlier venture that you need other kinds of things. What we also knew was, as I said earlier, that a lot of the programs we have been involved in working with, evidence-based health promotion disease prevention program, started out of universities, where a professor would have an idea, they would develop an educational program, they would do a randomized trial, prove that it worked, and then they would stick their heads up and say, how do we commercialize it? And they would spend a lot of time trying to get people to buy the program, but they had a couple of problems. One, they couldn't necessarily get payers to pay for it, and at the same time, they couldn't necessarily get consumers to sign up for them because the way designed wasn't necessarily designed to appeal to consumers, et cetera. So what we decided to do differently than many of them, that we decided not to begin by proving the program worked, but by developing a program that people would like, that consumers would enjoy, that people would tell us that they were getting a lot out of, even if it wasn't yet, randomized trials or quasi-experimental design. And in order to do that, we realized that the way to do that was co-create programs. We had the concept for the ideas, but we worked with initially 5 great senior centers. We started there with community program development people, and we said, let's create something that worked for you, worked for the organizations, et cetera. And then 2 years into this, when we knew it was popular, we knew that people liked it, we then invested in the science, in proving the quasi-experiments, and we now have one that's just completed, another one that's just getting launched soon. So we are getting to the evidence that we need, but we're also doing that with more of a confidence that they can sign up people for the program, they can fill classes, et cetera. So where we are now is, 2.5 years into it, the program's in 175 communities. People like it, it's growing. We're developing some of the evidence that we expect will allow for some government funding to be a source of support. We're also developing proof points that consumers will pay for some of these things. But even then, we're realizing that to truly get to scale, and for example, if we were in 1,000 communities, and we believe we could get 1,000 community organizations to take the program, and if each one of those programs, each one of those organizations offered the program to 200 people a year, that would be something. It would be 200,000 people. That's not bad, but we're looking at 75 million people and saying that if we truly want to get to scale, and my job is to get us to 10 million, that you can't just do it on the community side. So we're developing and testing an in-home product in a couple of months. And the other thing we're learning is that, and this gets to the issue of commercial viability, we have a program that can be 10 weeks to 12 weeks, typically cost about $250 to $300 per participant, but that's a price point which health plans and others aren't going to pay for everybody. So having lighter products, which is online versions or books and in-home, is also essential for this kinds of thing. So our lessons learned on this is that you have to supplement if you really want to get to scale. Not everybody does, but our goal is to affect the lives of millions. We have to offer a great program in multiple venues and multiple price points, and that grant funding, and it's been hard, but we've been able to get the grant funding to get us to here, but we don't think that we can get grant funding to bring us to the true scale side of things. And so we'll talk more about that as well. But I will say, there's a great joy in social enterprise. It's fun, it's challenging, it's hard, and we're very excited about this, but maybe we'll come back in 2 years and we'll be able to tell you the rest of the story on the Aging Mastery Program.
So what we'd like to do now is talk about another one of our social enterprises, My Medicare Matters. And again, the context is important. Right at the time that Medicare Part D was coming into play, folks realized that there was a lot of confusion about it. Nobody knew anything about it, and what those people that knew about Medicare also realized is very few people knew much about Medicare, and so through grant funding, we were able to stand up an educational website called My Medicare Matters, and that started out being primarily about Medicare Part D, but it expanded into education across all of Medicare, and we were successful with it. We were getting some traffic to it, not a huge amount, and then, as always happens with grants, the interests of the funders move away. And we saw that happening, and then the question is, well, what are we going to do about this? Well, that happened to be at the same time that the transformation of post-retirement health benefits was changing pretty dramatically. And corporate America was moving from defined benefits to defined contribution health, basically giving people a subsidy, a voucher, and giving them some assistance in picking a plan, but it was basically you're going to go out and pick a plan. And that was for the 25% of retirees that actually had post-retirement health benefits. For the rest of people turning 65, basically what happened, and if you're 64 or 64 and a half years of age or older, you know what happens. you start getting the piles of letters. My health plan, this health plan, Medigap, Medicare Advantage, go here, buy this, jump down this hole, and it's just a barrage. And the reality is that most people, their entire lives, have been getting their health care from their employer. And their employer actually made it relatively simple. You didn't have to select a carrier. They said, we've done that for you, and here are your 3 plans. Ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. So all of a sudden, people turn 65, and they have to sign up for Medicare, but they don't even know, do I have to sign up now? What happens if I'm working? Do I have to sign up for Part A or Part B? If I'm working and I have health insurance, do I have to get something from my employer to say that I have this crazy thing called credible coverage? What is credible coverage anyway? I've never heard of it. And there's all of this going on at the same time that the companies that have been serving corporate America and helping them with their benefits management were gearing up on the corporate side to be doing all of this with their call centers and their brokerage and all of that. So we asked ourselves the following question. One is it possible for us to be able to tie education with action? Because at the end of the day, if you educate people, but they don't take action, or they don't take actions that lead them to good solutions, what good has the education been? So that's it. Okay, so do we become insurance brokers? And we actually talked about that a little, decided for a lot of reasons it didn't make sense. And one of the reasons it didn't make sense was because we did some analysis of some companies that were actually already doing this for corporations and concluded that there were some of them that were really quite good. And so then we said, maybe we should try partnering. So we sat down and we created what we called standards of excellence, and you'll see that in the approach, and you'll see that quality and standards of excellence thing coming up in everything we talk about in terms of social enterprise when it relates to doing it with a private sector organization. And actually, we had one of our board members had recently been the head of CMS, and he was the first person we went to. And we said, okay, if we wanted to have an excellent brokerage service, given that you're the guy that up until recently was in charge of Medicare in all these markets, what would it look like? And he ticked off 4 or 5 things. Then Jim put together a group of national experts in advocacy and education and consumer protection in the field, and said, what other things should be in here? And we created a set of standards of excellence, and we said, well, let's go see if we can't go talk to some of these really stand-up players and say, would you be willing to adhere to these standards of excellence, be willing to be audited to these standards of excellence, including secret shopping and all the like, and if you would, we'd be willing for those people that for our educational process that are interested in talking to a broker about that, because there's 3 paths people can choose. They can self-serve and go to Medicare.gov. They can go to their local SHIPS organization, which is basically a program federal government sponsors to do Medicare education, or they can go with a broker. And we felt if they are going to choose the broker route, wouldn't it be great if they could have some confidence that this organization is meeting these sorts of standards of excellence, if there's somebody that sort of has my back? So we hired a consultant, showed them our criteria for a partner. They identified several. We talked to several, and the one that just jumped out was Aon Hewitt. And it was basically for a couple of reasons. They were large, they had a great name, and because of the Hewitt background, they were totally sensitive to consumer needs, because their clients were Fortune 500 companies. And so they wanted their people to be treated right. Long and short of it is we were able to work things out. It was a very, very interesting process, and we were able to get agreements around the standards of excellence, that those needed to be met. If they weren't met, they had to be remedied. If they weren't remedied, what the consequences were, and all that good stuff. The exciting thing for me as I look at this slide is that since 2015, through this partnership with Aon, we've educated about 1.6 million people. It's actually larger now. And what's even more exciting is that over 200,000 of them have actually taken action. So the lessons from all this, one is that sometimes it all comes together, and if you get the right partner and you meet a marketplace need, you really can have strong social impact and good financial results. Another thing is that even though the people at a particularly large organization that you're working with can be awesome, and in our case they are, you need to remember that they're one small part of a very large organization, and they have all kinds of pressures and all kinds of pullings on their time and everything. So patience and understanding and putting yourself in your partner's sort of shoes are critical to the success of that sort of partnership.
Thank you, Jay. So we are going to try in the next 15 minutes to go through the rest. We want to make sure we have enough time for discussion. So now we're getting to some of the lessons learned. And again, I hope some of these things will be useful. I think the most fundamental idea is you need a great idea. I mean, you can't just say, I want a business if it doesn't both meet a need. But a great idea, I think it's possible to more clearly define what that is. The first thing that I find really important is that most nonprofits, if you're going to have a great idea, you really need to think more broadly about what your assets are. It's both your tangible assets and your intangible assets. For example, in the intangible, in the example that Jay just gave, we probably brought more in the intangible assets, meaning knowledge of Medicare, relationships, and our brand. And we were willing to put all that together more than a lot of money we had or other kinds of things. So I think one of the things I would encourage all of us to do in the sector, excuse me, is to really realize that what the assets we bring to the table, we want to combine them. We obviously want to do it to have significant social impact. We're just not interested. There might be a great business in ecotourism for older adults, but that doesn't rise to our level of having social impact, and therefore we don't want to do it. It has to be something, in our case, that not only can be monetized, but scaled, because I've got to improve the lives of my team of 10 million people. But the other thing that's really, and the good news about this, it usually does, and it should emerge from your charitable work. It's not some idea being brought to you out of nowhere. It's something that evolves out of the deep knowledge and understanding that you have. At the same time, Everett Rogers, who wrote the books on diffusion of innovation, really defined the 5 characteristics of a great innovation. And again, you've got to hit on all 5 of these cylinders to have an idea that works. One is a relative advantage, means it really has to be better than what's out there, and significantly better. It could be because it has greater impact. It could be because it costs half as much. But it's got to be something that's not 5% better, but the 50%, 100% better. Secondly, whomever you're trying to sell it to, and in our case, sometimes we're selling it both to community organizations who have to implement it, as well as payers who have to pay for it. It has to be compatible. It has to fit in with what they're used to doing, what they're used to buying, et cetera. The third thing, and this again, where it can't be too complicated. If you have a program that requires, weeks of training, and every time that person leaves, you have to start all over again, people won't use it. Testable is great. Before somebody has to make a big decision, try it, you'll like it. is really important to get people to buy. And the benefits have to be obvious. They have to be seen. They can't just be ethereal or theoretical. Now that may be in some cases, for example, there's a belief sometimes that healthcare only one thing where the benefit is proven savings. Well, that's not true. Sometimes the obvious thing can be customers really like it, or they're happy, or retention. But whatever, you need to understand what benefit matters and make that apparent. So again, if your idea fits into this framework, you'll be a lot further along. Next slide, please. The second one is the more strategic one, but when you get into this, it's going to take twice as long. It's going to be harder than you thought. You're going to be people that questioning why you're doing this, your answers are there if it really fits your vision, mission, core values, if it fits your hedgehog, if it's consistent with your BHAG, and it's monetizing multiple assets. So this is really, it's one way, but when you put all these things together, what it meant for NCOA is that it took us, I've been at the job for 21 years, it wasn't until about 6 or 7 years ago that we found ideas that really fit. So the strategic fit, the ability to make the justification to your board to continue to invest in it is going to be a lot hard if it really doesn't have a very tight strategic fit. And I think it's also harder if you haven't done the hard work of strategy and understanding your hedgehog and BHAGs, et cetera. The next slide is was taken in part at the last independent sector meeting. Taz Hussain gave a presentation about really this issue of selling social change, and it's also the articles available at Stanford Social Innovation Review. So without going into too much other than to recommend it, I think he made several cogent points. One is that I many times have mistaken need for demand. There's a tremendous need for something, people want it, but there's a need, there's a demand, and there's willingness to pay. And need really doesn't have necessarily a lot to do with either demand, meaning people will show up and take advantage of a program, or willingness to pay. And he gave an example of a program called the Diabetes Prevention Program, which has been, it's had $200 million worth of research behind it. It's proven to work. It's even the case that the people will pay for it, and that those programs, as a community-based program, have a very difficult time recruiting. And recruitment costs were making it almost impossible to scale. And then juxtapose that with the entry of online solutions, which, when in combination, have been able to accelerate growth. The second point, which is I kind of made in the earlier slide, is designed for both spreadability, commercial viability, and social impact. His third point is that when you have a great idea, you still have to figure out who to segment the market. When people say, who's this program for? And you say everybody, that's a bad answer. And it may be for everybody, but really looking at the issue of early adopters in particular markets, or segmenting the market is essential. And I think the last point they make is that many of us underestimate what it takes to build sales and marketing capabilities. And those are often not the competencies of our organizations. And as Jay said, sometimes, particularly if you have a product, you can't sell it. You got to align with other products and other people selling into health plans, et cetera. The next slide, I think, is a bit Jim Collins-esque, is that you can't do anything without great people. And that means having the right people on the bus and the right people off the bus, and in the right seats on the bus. I think the fundamental ones for us are that what this meant was the right staff leadership. If you have an idea to build a bridge, you're not going to give that task to somebody who's always been interested in learning how to build a bridge. You're going to go to an engineer who successfully built several bridges. If you want to do a startup or have a business, and you don't want to give it to somebody who's interested in always learning about social enterprises, you want businesses, you want somebody who's experienced in the type of businesses that you've had. And I would say the thing I will take credit for in this is bringing Dr. Greenberg on board, because he is the right person in the right seat to lead it. The second thing that we realized was that we needed the right structure for the enterprise, and for us, we decided that was not just to do it to do it as a limited liability corporation where NCOA is the sole owner of the LLC, but that it had a separate structure, in part for liability reasons, in part for cultural reasons, but more important, for the right board of directors, because we have a 15-person board at the NCOA board. It's a great board, but only 3 or 4 of them were really expert in business and startup. And we realized that we needed a board with more business expertise and a smaller board. So we recruited a smaller board, which was at 5 now to 7 people, to focus on, and all of those are contributors. So I think you need all 3 of those things. We also need, many times, that most nonprofits do not have all of the competencies to scale a large business. So finding the right partners, mission alignment, complementary skills, etc. And then the right strategic investors, people who are investing in the business for the same reason, and for the success of the enterprise, which I'll come back to later, but that's trickier than it may seem, to find people who really, actually, once you peel back the onion, really do want to accomplish the same things that your organization does.
And the only thing I would add there, that if the home run is to find the right strategic partner that also has a big enough checkbook to be the right strategic investor. Go to the next slide. And so, you know, one of the things that I focus on a lot, and I encourage you to as well, is structure. And really thinking through the structure at the front end, and really hammering down, and you've heard me talk about it, who has fiduciary responsibility, who has accountability for what, for whom. Extraordinarily important, and if they're the right partner, they will get it. The second thing is to anticipate failure as well as success. And basically what I mean by that is, quite often, you know, in a new relationship, that you're showing the spreadsheets and you're showing the pro formas and all, and you're focusing on success and what will this mean for us. Also, but spend more time focusing on, if it doesn't work, how do we protect our brand? How do we protect our intellectual property? How do we make sure to have the right glide path if we have to disassemble this and displace it? You know, and so it's much more fun to believe your own pro formas and think about the success part of it. But I really encourage you to think very clearly about if it doesn't work and bake that in. Go to the next slide. There we go. Culture not only matters, but communication is incredibly challenging, and it goes something like this. So at NCOA, people came to work at NCOA, the charity, for a lot of reasons, but mainly there were some really consistent values and themes and culture in terms of a point of view about the importance of the voluntary sector. A lot of times distrust of the private sector. Sometimes that distrust was very well placed, and sometimes it was ideology. But if you're going to have a successful social enterprise, you're going to have people in that are not only passionate about those same values, but they come at it from more of possibly the market side, or they have skill sets that you have to compete with the private sector on, such as in our case, social media. We have this awesome small group that just really understands social media, and we wouldn't have the results that we had if they weren't 3 steps ahead of the big boys, if you will, as it relates to that. But then think about, and you don't want to separate them and put them in different buildings. Why? Because to Jim's point, the whole point of the social enterprise is take, if you will, the assets and the seed corn of the parent, the not-for-profit, and figure out how to utilize those in the social enterprise. So you're forced to make sure that everybody works together, and it's hard. You can do it, and don't underestimate the amount of communication that you need, and learn patience.
So what we'd like to do here is take 2 issues that are a little more looking at the sector, and then open up for questions. Because I know what I love about the independent sector things broadly, and we, as I mentioned earlier, there's this big gap, we think, in the financing of helping organizations go to scale. So what we'd like to do is talk quickly about 2 of the most promising things that we see, which we hope, I know there's some foundations on here on the line as well, but what we can do as a sector to really encourage more capital for mission-related social enterprises. And Jay will talk to the first, and I'll talk to the second.
And I promise to be incredibly short because I'm unbelievably passionate about the hope and the promise of benefits corporations as an efficient, effective form of social enterprise. And I would add parenthetically, possibly a model for 21st century capitalism in the United States. And I would encourage all of you, and we can get you the readings. I know some of the organizations have already been investigating this. There's a series of articles that were put out by the American Bar Association just a few months ago on benefits corporations. And for those of you that had looked at them 5 years ago, things have changed pretty dramatically. There's been some real progress. I encourage you to read those articles. We'll get you the references. And we are now at the front end of seriously exploring a possible benefits corporation. And we'll report back in a year or so about how that went.
And just that's a way to attract more traditional investors, but still with the social mission baked in. I'd like to talk a little bit about what I see as, in addition to that, is what's needed. Grants are great. Most of nonprofit organizations are used to grants and philanthropic support, but we get these grants for the purpose of doing good work. And in a social enterprise frame, the purpose of grants should be to get to the point where you don't need grants. So that grants should not just be about doing something important. It should be building asset, proving, making proof points, getting yourself positioned for social enterprises. And if you think about that, you can use then grant funding to help you incubate and ideate and do initial proof concepts of an idea. But, and that's helpful, but even then you'll probably wind up doing some self-financing, and all of this will take a long time. However, once you get past that point and you need more money, this is where the rub comes in. I'm going to be slightly provocative here to make the point. You think first people go, they want to go to venture capitalists. Well, the problem with venture capitalists is a couple. One, they're going to say, where's my 21% annual return, and what's my exit strategy? And you probably don't have answers to those, because sometimes nonprofits say, we don't have an exit strategy. This is sort of who we want to stay. The second thing is that most venture capitalists, and we've had some painful experiences like that, even investors who we didn't think were venture capitalists who thought like it, who said, well, we're going to fund you, but they came in with the idea that they're going to fund 10 things, 2 of 10 which are going to work, and the other 8 they're going to cut off at the knees. So I would say, it's not, as a general rule, venture capitalists do not have great alignment with nonprofits in terms of what they're trying to do. The second thing that I've been hearing a lot about for years is venture philanthropy. I think venture philanthropy, I hope I'm not offending anybody, is a unicorn. It doesn't exist. It's just, I spent 2.5 years traveling around the country, talking to people, and it's not that somebody can't give you an example of where a foundation made an investment, but when you actually say that looking for a philanthropy that aligns with my interests, that has a venture philanthropy approach, that's willing to provide the round of capital that I need at the certain proof point, it becomes a set of conditions which I would say 98 out of 100, I probably believe 99.5 times out of 100, doesn't exist. So I think, and certainly doesn't exist in any sort of efficient way that ventures could be here. So what I think is needed is something closer to something that was like the National Cooperative Bank back in the 1980s. The notion that we need to set up an investment bank for nonprofits that have ideas for social ventures. And that it can't be so specific that it only wants to fund social ventures related to incarcerated youth in Detroit, but it's more broadly say that we are willing to invest in this, that it could include relationship, for example, where traditional philanthropy could fund initial proof of concept, they might even fund initial business plans, but then there's a source of capital which is general in its goal, not specific. I think the ideal thing from my point of view would be foundations fund this from their assets, so that if 10 foundations put in $10 million expecting a 2 or 3% rate of return, it's possible to create this kind of bank. But what I really challenge all of us as a sector to realize is that, in my view, there is no efficient capital market, and unless we create something general, we're just not going to get there. And maybe that is slightly provocative, but I think that we've been talking amongst ourselves as a community. There have been a number of ventures which have been tried to create marketplaces to match nonprofits with investors, and I see very few signs of successful investment, certainly no signs of an efficient market. So to summarize where we are quickly is that this is about creating and implementing market-driven, self-sustaining solutions to problems, that it needs to fit your strategy in a fairly clear way, that you need to solve, hopefully simultaneously, not linearly, for commercial and social viability, that grants are great for the initial phases, but they're probably not going to be enough to take you to scale, and that strategic partnerships, new kinds of philanthropic funds and benefits corporations, we believe are the means to access growth capital in the future. And finally, after we're ready to open up, a few more readings, if you're interested in. One is the articles that Jay referred to from the ABA on benefits corporations. 2 is the Taz Hussein Bridgespan article on selling social change. And if you're a cookbook guy on business planning and business strategy, we've had good success with 2 books by David Loftiana. So with that, we've gone a little over, but we would happy to open it up to questions, comments, challenges, anything that might be of interest to any of you.
So we have questions in the room, and then I'll go to the questions that have come in online.
Great. Yeah, so I have one question, which was Jay mentioned the importance of aligning any new business models or new business strategies with your existing programs. In order to be able, existing programs, if I heard right, are kind of the seed capital that helps to launch the newer strategies. I'm curious if you have any tips or frames to think of with that. we're launching a new program, but we don't want all of our staff to be like, whoa. Yes. So top tips on aligning the old as you're trying to infuse the new.
Yeah, so I'm hearing two questions in there.
Okay.
One is, you know, one is how to think about those, using those assets, and the other I heard, maybe I'm wrong, is the cultural aspect of how do you not blow away your staff with, oh my God, what are they smoking? And with regard to the former, it really is a question, regardless of whether you're going into social enterprise or not. Think of everything you do as Lego blocks. And every program you have, every core competency you have, every strategic relationship you have are Lego blocks. And and then ask yourself as you're going into things, in essence, do that inventory. Most organizations don't even do the inventory. And then like Lego blocks, it's amazing once you start playing with your Lego blocks. I mean, my 6-year-old grandson takes these Lego blocks and builds amazing creatures. You can do the same thing. So I encourage you to do the Lego block exercise with your staff. The second piece, I think, is really one of conversation and cultural awareness. What's really interesting is we recently had a retreat at NCOA. It was a great retreat, and a lot of it had to do with cultural sensitivities. And it dawned on me that we did it for everything that would make sense for everybody. Whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's sexual orientation or whatever, but we didn't do anything on cultural sensitivity, to what it takes to do a social enterprise. So one of the things we're going to do is figure out how to incorporate that as we start thinking about cultural sensitivities.
The only thing I would add is saying that you've got every organization around this table has deep expertise in something. And so it's really about how you're leveraging your expertise and your brand and your connection to create an enterprise, and recognizing that what you may not have is some of the startup business development things, but when you create, every one of the examples we gave was preceded by 5 to 10 years of work in an area. So we knew a lot about the area, but then we brought in people who could help figure out how to monetize that. But you want to do that in a way that the people with deep expertise in the area feel that they're part of it, that they're contributing to this, which is essential, but also Jay can also create some cultural issues. So it's defining it in a way that people see it as a complementary approach to achieving things, not as a separate organization with different values, although there may be times when normal work hours don't apply because it's a startup or things like that.
So asking your expertise, pulling them in on meetings, just regular internal communications, engagement.
Yeah, and also validating that this couldn't have happened without, and it's a natural extension of our work. I think the idea that you're going to pull something out of the air that doesn't flow naturally as a logical next insight on how to continue to further your mission, those tend not to succeed, or they get pushed aside when other priorities occur.
So we have questions online. The first one was more of a comment, but Matt Ziegler from Catholic Charities USA shares that many of their agencies have launched social enterprises, now 41 across the country, to expand their work, leverage new ways to provide economic opportunity to their clients in a financially sustainable way. So if you're looking for other examples, you can reach out to the Catholic Charities.
Yeah, well, and if I can build on that, I really think, like I said, we know our little corner of the world. We have some insight, but I really think the independent sector, and that's a great example of what is it that 41, regional or place-based enterprises have figured out, and how do we create a greater learning community? Because I really do think that I don't think we have all the answers. I just think we have a few of them. And I think it would really help the field for more of us to share lessons learned on this topic. So I'd welcome you, and knowing Catholic Charities, know that they're probably about alleviating poverty, and some of them probably also affect our population. So there may very well be opportunities for collaboration that could come from understanding who else is doing mission-driven social enterprise work.
Very good. Very good point. Another question that came in during the Canary Health discussion was a question around what was the process you used in finding an effective partner when creating the process?
Great question. So what we did is we sat down and we laid out what are the things that we want to be able to do in this? What are the things that we need from our partner? And that was important for getting very clear about what the proposition was going to be. Then it was, what are the other things? So, for example, what were the values of the organization? Why were they there? Why were they formed? What is their mission? How passionate are the people about that mission? As well as, what, do they see the world in a similar way in terms of 1 + 1 would equal 5? And then finally, we needed to make sure that this was a primary part of what their business was, that their business was going to fail or succeed based on whether or not evidence-based self-management programs and programming were successful, both monetarily and using those standards of excellence. And then finally, they needed to have access to capital.
So I'd just like to say, so there are a couple of things in there. One is figuring out at what stage in this process you need partners. It could be sometimes, like in the case of My Medicare Matters, we need the partners right up front in order to do that. In the case of Canary Health, we were incubating it for ourselves for a while. But then we went through a very systematic process, not only of identifying the criteria, but it took, I don't know, 6 to 9 months or maybe longer to actually look at possibilities and talk with them. So I think, selection of who you're going to get married with, and as Jay said earlier, planning for downside, which I think of as having a good prenuptial agreement, is essential to success, because no matter where you start out, things are going to be different. And if you don't have that values alignment and really the same horizon and the same goals, you're going to have a problem down the road if your strategic partners, strategic investors become essential to success, which isn't always the case, but often is.
The next question that's online here is, did you use a specific model for creating a program that people would like? For example, human-centered design or other specific?
We did, in the sense that we decided that in this case, how do you get older people to do things? And our program's all about behavior change. We want them to do things. The number one requirement was nobody goes to the dentist for a root canal unless they have to, right? So that if you want people to do things, you want to make it fun. So we put fun factor as an essential agreement, because if people thought it was fun, and yes, it had to be educational and have to be good. So we've been constantly measuring how much fun it's been, and that fun is really the thing I'm proud of. We get 98% of the participants say the program's fun, and that doesn't mean it isn't. They're not learning; they are, because fun isn't just superficial. Fun comes from engagement, etc. But we decided that fun was the number one thing, and kind of would they recommend it to their friends, and would they are they satisfied with the quality of education? Those are things we were measuring from the beginning, and then later on we said, to what extent does it improve the number of minutes you spend in physical activity, or the amount of time you spend in, or do you have an advanced care plan, or you improve your admission? So you have to decide what are the factors that are going to make people want the program. But I would say in general, on health promotion, disease prevention, fun is is really an important thing to solve for.
And we found the same thing in My Medicare Matters, and that's why we brought in the team we brought in who really understood engagement online. If you go to My Medicare Matters, you'll see some fun animated features, but that are really, really important. And we can actually measure that connectivity in terms of how many people go through how many page turns, how many people actually take an action. And then what's been really fun to see is how easily it is, if you have really useful stuff that are coming from a reliable source, to build trust and relationship online. And so there's now 100,000 Facebook followers that we have, where that was 0 a year and a half ago. If you look at how much it costs us to get a visitor to our site and to get them engaged, it's 1/20th of what it costs most for-profit organizations, particularly during an open enrollment when people have to scurry around buying the word Medicare in order to buy it. And we don't have to do that. We don't have to do that because it was engaging. And I'm not so sure it's fun, but it certainly is engaging. I agree with Jim. I think that's essential.
And the way I would just put it in the context of what Taz Hussein said, if you're designing for scalability, you can ask yourself, what does it mean? What is it going to take consumers to want this? What is it going to take if you have community partners that need to implement it? What is going to make them want to implement it? And if you're expecting a third-party payer to pay for it, you really need to design for all three of those, because if you're missing any one of them, and I've seen this work, payers will pay for it, organizations will implement it, but consumers won't show up in enough numbers, or consumers will show up, organizations want to do it, but nobody will pay for it. So you can define, that will get you to the answer of what it takes, I think. In our case, it was fun for this particular kind of intervention.
There's 2 questions around testing, so I'm going to read them together. But one is, could you tell us more about the role testing and evaluation in your process for evaluating the success of these social enterprise programs? And do you have a model you follow for testing?
So it's a good question, and I think the model really has to be specific to the program and the media by which the program is being implemented. So in the case again of My Medicare Matters, built into it, you can see how many people went where, what level of education were they getting, how much engagement was there, how many people raised their hand for help, what actually happened on the end of that. And in the case of health plans, Kaiser Family Foundation's research really showed that a huge percentage of seniors are not in a health plan that is optimal for them at that time. And so it's you can then go on the back end and see what coverage they had, what coverage they changed to, and whether there was a better fit. And again, for each program, it really will be different.
The other thing I would say, and there's a kind of a macro level and a micro level of this, but I think the mistake people make sometimes is proving an invention, putting the evaluation during the randomized trial or the quasi-experiment for an intervention that's not commercially viable. So I think that, because then you almost ossify the program because you've proven it worked in a certain way, but that's not the price point or the delivery way that works. So I would say that you want to make sure before you go out, and you probably can get the grant to do the randomized trial or the big study to prove that something works, that you have confidence that it's something that consumers will like, that whoever you need to implement it can implement it. And if you can prove those results, you know what you're proving and why, which is usually about convincing a payer to pay for it. So I think a lot of times people fire that bullet too early and then find themselves locked in. Jay's right, it's specific, but I think there's a question of what data to show the intervention works. The second thing is the constant measuring of scale, reach, and also financial performance measures, because for us and for most people, you need to, again, succeed both on the mission side and the impact side and the business side.
So we have about 5 more minutes, and we have 3 more questions, so maybe we can get
Short answers.
Yeah. What role has your communications team played in sharing with others the work you are doing in social enterprise, and how have they partnered with your commercial / business partners?
So we may well have different answers to this one, but my shorthand answer is we on the NCOAS side, we've deliberately been pretty quiet because it was early on, and we wanted to make sure we actually had a credible story to tell. We're now beginning to think through a broader communication strategy and working with the parent NCOA on that. For example, on one of the online programs, we had a 5-year study going that was funded by the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation, where our partners, were community-based organizations, Oasis and the Y, and we were doing the program online and in the community. And our carrier partner, Anthem, was heavily involved, and we just got the results back, and the program had serious impact on both the social impact and the financial side. And so we are now beginning to figure out, how to use those results, how to communicate them, and how to get those results in the hands of people in the field, so that they can use that evidence as it relates to their programs as well.
And the other thing I'd add, in terms of talking about what we're doing in social enterprise and what we've learned, this is the first time we've ever done. First time we ever put together some slides and try to talk about it. So we would welcome feedback from this, particularly and what if any insights you got from this by email or other, because this is the first time somebody asked us to talk about it, and so we then put together some slides. So it's early on for us, and we really welcome the idea of a learning community, because I think we want to accelerate individual success. I think we also want to accelerate collective success, particularly on the capital front of this.
Another question someone has is, are there certain things to watch out for when looking for partners in order to avoid the negative venture capitalist situation?
Yes, I think at the end of the day, you need to spend a lot of time, excessive amounts of time, really understanding what your partners want and what they don't want. If they're looking for a quick exit, if they're really in this to drive a certain business objective, that's not bad, but you need to truly understand it. I think the stability, in my mind, the stability of the company is really important. So when you're dealing with large companies, that can be easier to tell. When you're dealing with small companies and startups, you have to worry about what happens if things change and there's new ownership. So I consider strategic partnerships like this as serious and as important as getting married. And I really think you need to think of it that way, because divorces are messy and divorces are expensive. And so just really make sure they share the same values, that they have the same real goals, pulling it back. And if Jay says anticipating failures and what are all the things that could go wrong and how would you really do that, those prenups really matter. In my view, a lot.
And right, I would agree, and make sure to write all the documents as if all the parties that are around the table are long gone.
All right, let's see, we're almost at the bottom of the hour. I'll have one more. Yeah, okay, it looks like we have another one to sneak in, but I think we're gonna have to cap it. It says, the question here, I'm gonna just read it. So you are saying that building the initial investment capital to launch a social enterprise at the moment is based on piecing together grants and dollars from philanthropic donors until the business model is able to pick up the expense of everyday operations?
No, I would say that that's one model, I think, which is the one that sometimes is easier if you don't have a strategic investor, a strategic partner. I think if you can find the right strategic investor, the right strategic partner from the beginning to finance, in other words, which we were able to do in the case of My Medicare Matters, a partner that would come in and provide, not through grants. I mean, we did have a history of grants, which gave us knowledge and assets to bring to the table. If you can find the right strategic investor and get funding for a couple of years of runtime, that's wonderful. I haven't been able to do that. Jay's been able to figure out how to do that in a couple of cases. So in some ways, that's the preferred model, but I just think that that can be difficult. So I think you can start wherever you can, but recognize that you are going to piece together grants. Unless it's a small, local enterprise, it's probably not going to be enough to get you where you need to go. So the earlier you think about where that next round's going to come from, the better.
All right, so before we close out independent sector, just wanted to thank Jim and Jay for coming in and educating us on this topic today. And then a couple other details, we will be sending out an email that will include the slides as well as a survey for this webinar in the next couple of days. And then, as we mentioned before, this is the first webinar in a three-part series. And webinar number 2 will be with American Alliance for Museums, and it's on March 23rd, and we will be sending out details about that soon, so you can watch that as well. Thank you again for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And it was cathartic, so I hope people found something useful from it.